The ideas and script for this video were developed and written by human beings. Technology was used to assist with the production of the content. Please enjoy.
We welcome our viewers around the world. Today, we discuss the political situation in South Africa and explore the ill treatment of foreigners in the country and how many countries in Africa supported Black South Africans in their fight for independence about 4 decades ago. The learning objectives are on your screen. We explain xenophobia and examine the current hostility and violence affecting African migrants in South Africa. We remember Africa's sacrifice and explore how African nations supported South Africa's struggle against apartheid. We evaluate scenarios when the tables turn and consider whether those sacrifices would have been made knowing what we know today. We reiterate to African governments the need to protect their citizens and the increasing need to value, defend, and safeguard their citizens at home and abroad. Let us remind ourselves of the historical context, a time when South African law segregated people according to race and skin color, and the indigenous black majority was systematically treated as inferior to the white minority, largely descended from European settlers. Apartheid institutionalized this racial hierarchy, denying Black South Africans fundamental political, economic, and social rights in their own country. Many great men and women, both within and outside South Africa, fought for its independence. Many of them were foreigners. Many lost their lives in the process. In those days, great men walked the earth. Those were the days of the late great Steve Biko. Those were the days of the late great Nelson Mandela and many others. This was the period when the late great Jomo Kenyatta was president of Kenya and the name of the late great Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia was on everyone's tongue. Nigeria became one of the most prominent African opponents of apartheid. Across successive governments, Nigerian leaders and diplomats, including General Olusegun Obasanjo, General Ibrahim Babangida, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, General Ike Nwachukwu, and Emeka Anyaoku, played important roles in the broader diplomatic and political campaign against apartheid. Nigeria committed substantial political, diplomatic, and financial support to the liberation struggle. Nigerian citizens were encouraged to see the oppression of Black South Africans not merely as a South African problem, but as an African problem. Ghana's opposition to apartheid similarly stretched back to the early independence era and the Pan-African vision of Kwame Nkrumah. Across southern Africa, the sacrifices were even more immediate. The Frontline states placed themselves directly in the path of apartheid South Africa's military and economic power. The late President Robert Mugabe and the late Joshua Nkomo of Zimbabwe supported the liberation struggle. Other neighboring African states provided refuge, political support, and logistical assistance despite the risks. Kenya and other African countries opposed apartheid diplomatically and participated in the broader continental campaign to isolate the regime. Post-apartheid South Africa was supposed to demonstrate something better. It was supposed to demonstrate the dignity of the human person under law. However, the international community has watched how the country has drifted from its ideals. What went so wrong for a once great country filled with promise? Where, when, and how it became derailed will remain an enduring question. Nigeria, Ghana, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and other countries have been forced to confront the safety of their nationals in a country whose liberation many Africans once regarded as their own struggle. And this presents Africa with a deeply uncomfortable historical irony. There are moments in history when nations are forced to confront an uncomfortable question. If we had known then what we know now, would we have made the same sacrifices? Today, that question must be asked across Africa. Nigerians, Ghanaians, Zimbabweans, Malawians, Kenyans, and other African migrants in South Africa have faced intimidation, harassment, and violence, including death, amid another wave of anti-immigrant agitation, also known as xenophobia. Governments have warned their citizens to return home. For decades, apartheid South Africa was isolated by much of Africa. African countries did not simply express sympathy, they spent political capital and money. They accepted economic sacrifices, and they carried South Africa's struggle into international institutions. The underlying principle was simple. Black South Africans were our African brothers and sisters. Their suffering mattered, their freedom mattered, their lives mattered. Africa helped because apartheid was morally wrong, and that was the right thing to do. But history has turned the tables. Now the foreigner is an African. Today, the descendants of the continent that helped South Africa are being told by South Africans, go back home. We must be careful here. This is not an indictment of the South African people as a whole. Many South Africans have condemned xenophobia. Some communities have defended migrants. South Africa's government has publicly condemned vigilantism, intimidation, and violence. However, observers have noted that the voices of many of those in government have been very muted or extremely weak. South Africa also has every right to control its borders and enforce its immigration laws. A person who has no lawful right to remain in South Africa may be removed through lawful immigration procedures. No country is required to have an open border, but immigration enforcement is the responsibility of the state. A mob is not an immigration court. A vigilante is not an immigration officer. And someone's nationality is not permission to assault, humiliate, or kill that person. There is an enormous moral difference between deportation according to law and persecution according to nationality. The question Africa must now ask. And this brings us to the difficult question. Imagine that history could be reversed. Imagine Nigeria, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Kenya, and the rest of Africa standing again in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But this time they possessed a window into the future. Knowing all of this, would those countries make the same sacrifices again? Would they spend their money? Would they sacrifice economic opportunities? Would they offer sanctuary? Would they fight diplomatically? Would they tell their citizens, South Africa's struggle is our struggle? That question has two possible answers, and both answers carry a lesson. If the answer is yes, we would do it all over again. It means those sacrifices were not a transaction. Nigeria did not oppose apartheid because South Africa owed Nigerians permanent residency. They did it because apartheid was wrong. And if they would make those sacrifices again, despite knowing what would happen decades later, then the moral principle remains intact. But there is still a lesson. Solidarity does not eliminate national responsibility. No government should assume that yesterday's friendship guarantees tomorrow's protection. If the answer is no, then Africa has learned an even more consequential lesson. A country must regard the lives of its citizens as precious, not disposable, not expendable, not bargaining chips in somebody else's political struggle. There is nothing wrong with international solidarity. Indeed, there are moments when morality demands it. But governments must carefully distinguish between generosity and the abandonment of national interest. The first responsibility of any government is to its citizens. South Africa has legitimate problems. Unemployment is extraordinarily high. Communities struggle with poverty, crime, housing, and inadequate public services. Citizens have every right to demand answers from their government. As the country is now beginning to realize, unemployment has continued to rise even as many foreigners have been forced out. These migrants did not create South Africa's unemployment crisis. Many were filling positions that required specialized skills or taking jobs for which local workers were either not sufficiently qualified or unwilling to undertake. Governments must be held accountable for government failures. Foreign Africans cannot become convenient substitutes for that accountability. But every African government should remember, your citizen is precious. When that citizen travels abroad, your responsibility does not disappear. Protect their rights, demand their lawful treatment, provide consular assistance, repatriate them when necessary. and never allow sentimental slogans about continental unity to replace the practical obligations of government. South Africa's liberation remains one of Africa's great historical achievements. The Africans who opposed apartheid were right to oppose it. Their sacrifice was honorable because injustice was wrong then, just as xenophobic violence is wrong now. The lesson should therefore not be that Africa should never help another African country again. The lesson is more mature. Help others when justice requires it, but never forget your first responsibility to your own people. And perhaps South Africa, remembering how many Africans once refused to look away from the suffering of South Africans, should now make equally clear that it will not look away when Africans suffer on South African soil. History has turned the tables. The question is whether Africa has learned anything from it. The learning objectives have been met. If you found this presentation informative and educational, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing and sharing with family members, friends, and colleagues. Your support helps us create more informative and educational content. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful. This has been a presentation of Apomilero Media, LLC.